Good morning, thank you. For those of you who were expecting to see our Chief Mike Nolan this morning, Mike was unfortunately called away and was unable to be here, so I volunteered, at least that's what Mike told me, I volunteered to be here this morning. For those of you who came just to see Mike, I'm sure refunds are available at the door. Today I'm going to talk about community paramedicine and what's going on in the area. I'm going to use Renfrew County, which is where I work, as a specific example, but you'll find that what we're doing in Renfrew, you'll find it in other parts of Ontario as well, including in West Ottawa. So right now it's really a little bit of a Wild West with people trying different models to see what's going on. I believe we have the largest spread of models in Renfrew County, anyway, I think we'll cover some ground, at least at a high altitude, just to give you a feeling for what's going on. No disclosures this morning. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview about paramedics. Unless you work in the emergency department, you probably don't know a whole lot about paramedics. We're fairly visible in the community, running around with our lights on and so on. But most people get their knowledge from US television, which, as in most things, is probably not a good, reliable source for information. The Canadian system is quite different. We're a relatively new part of healthcare. We're not that long running out of the funeral home because they had vehicles that could take people in a horizontal position. But we have moved a long way in the last 2 decades, up to the point now where the advanced care paramedics, it takes about 3 years, about 3,000 hours, very, very focused and intensive training in the first hour of care. So we're really the first hour of care specialists, and that's first hour from the time you decide to dial 911. So that's really our focus. So we have a very broad depth of knowledge, but a broad range of knowledge, but it's 1 hour deep. That's how I like to describe it. These days it's very tough to get in if you're a young person looking to get into a paramedic program. It's not as hard as med school, but 10 years ago when I went through it, we had about 4,500 people competing for over 50 seats. So that's driven up the standard, shall we say, of the folks going through, and in doing that, of course, we can add more and more skills on top of that. As an example, the paramedics you'll find in the street here are second only to physicians in the number of delegated medical acts that they can perform. Really, the job of a paramedic in the field, first we have to access the patient, which in the city of Ottawa is usually not that big a deal. When you're in Renfrew County and realize it might involve a snowmobile, then that's interesting. So first we have to get to them, then we assess them, we try to identify any threats to life or limb, and to undertake any action which can help mitigate that threat. So we start treatment bedside, and then we decide on transport again. Maybe an ambulance, might be a helicopter, might be, we've actually winched people out using the military from time to time as well. This is what most people think we do. That's a train crash over in the corner, and actually that's me with the blue helmet. But in reality, this is mostly what we do. So mostly, this is what we do. We do trauma and cardiac arrest and all that kind of stuff that makes really interesting television. But the bulk of our day is dealing with folks over the age of 65. So in Renfrew County, 92% of our calls deal with the over 65 population. This is a map of the county of Renfrew for folks who are not that familiar. On the top right is the border of the city of Ottawa. You can just barely see there, that little light blue ribbon is the Ottawa River. So that's Arnprior. Arnprior is about a 35-minute, 40-minute drive from the Civic campus, unless you're going lights and sirens, and then it's quite a bit faster. But about a 30-minute drive by highway. At the very far end, either to the top left or to the bottom, it's about 200 kilometers. So a fairly big piece of geography. The circles represent our major population areas, and these are our main towns in Renfrew County. So you can see that we are really focused in a small number of centers, and we have a whole lot of empty space, very, very rural community. Our geography covers land area just slightly larger than Prince Edward Island. We're, I think, the largest county in Ontario, about 100,000 people. but it really poses some challenges to us and to our community. That big jagged bite in the bottom left is Algonquin Park, and we have a tendency to go up there from time to time, especially in the summer, and help our neighbors serve that community as well. So yeah, we have some pretty tight pockets, and then we have a whole lot of empty in between. This chart kind of shows population movement over time, and in the top left is Renfrew County, looking at us versus the entirety of the Champlain Lynn, and we have a fairly large proportion of our population that are in the geriatric band. Not too surprising, I suspect most of rural Ontario is like this. The younger folks tend to move into the major centers and sort of skew the population, so we have an older base in the county. And if you were to sort of overlay where we are now and Canada 2050 in the bottom right hand, we're kind of almost there. So we have a fairly large older population that we deal with on a daily basis. This is our scorecard. You know, I guess if this was stocks, it'd be great, but unfortunately it's not. We tend to do pretty well with certain types of cancers, and we're doing exceptionally well on the diabetes front as well. So this just gives you an idea in that column where it says RC Renfrew County, the sorts of things that we deal with on a daily basis in our population. I'm not sure why breast cancer is low in our area. I guess the epidemiologists could probably give us a better view of why we're low in that count. So we have some real challenges, as I've sort of alluded to. Access to services, which is a problem throughout our business, is even more so in our region because we have the issues of distance, and it's not always easy to get from a rural part of the community into one of the centers that offer services. In fact, today all the school buses are canceled in Renfrew County because of the threat of freezing rain, and you don't want to be on some of these country roads when the weather is bad, which is quite frequent during the winter. Availability is another issue. We all struggle with availability of services for our seniors population, and the city's a problem, and it's no different when you move outside of the city into the more rural parts of Ontario. Consistency is another issue that we have. About a year and a half ago, I looked at the availability of palliative care in Renfrew County and was surprised, I guess, to find out that the availability of care in that respect really varied quite a bit depending on where you lived. And if you were in Arnprior or the town of Renfrew, it was pretty good services, but if you were in Barry's Bay or up in Deep River, not so much. And so we had there's quite a disparity even across our small region in terms of availability of services, depending upon the local healthcare providers in that community and what they've signed up for and how they're structured. So we do have a consistency issue. And because our community is so large, it's not that easy if you live in Barry's Bay, for example, to go to Arnprior, which is 140 kilometers away. That's not an easy journey to access services. So we do have a consistency challenge, and of course we all have capacity challenges. Our supply doesn't come anywhere close to meeting demand in most all aspects, I guess. Coordination of care is no different a challenge in our community as it is elsewhere, in that we have lots of providers doing different things and trying to keep everything knitted together so that we all know what each other is doing has been, and I think will continue to be a challenge. And I'll have some slides later which will underscore some of the things that we're doing to try to mitigate that. So the unmet needs, which go down to availability, capacity, consistency, all the things I just mentioned, really have some measurable impacts in our community. And we see this in terms of the use of our services, often because these people are just not getting the answers, not getting the reassurance, not getting the information in their community, and they end up seeking it out. And because of the challenges I mentioned, we're often the vehicle to make that happen at the end of the day. Social isolation we see is a really big deal. As I said, we have a large portion of our community which the younger members of the family have moved away to the city, or maybe they're in the city all day working, and they're home all day, or they're home for long periods of time, sometimes weeks, and the social isolation really creates a lot of stress on them, and that boils over into frequent calls to us and frequent use of the emergency department, more frequent admissions, and when they are admitted, they tend to stay longer. So this has a roll-on effect. Let's give you a bit of an overview about how what we're doing here in terms of volume. These are numbers from last year. We had about 12,000 911 contacts for emergency services, our more traditional business that people would currently think paramedics do. But we actually last year exceeded that with our community paramedic practice when we had 13,000 patient contacts last year. So actually the community paramedicine part of our business, which I'll describe in a little more detail in a moment, is now bigger from a patient contact point of view than our traditional 911 business, which is rather interesting. And I think it's a trend to see where it's going in the community. Our community paramedics have a dual role. This is a little bit unique to Renfrew County, but I think it's going to be the model going forward. So we take advanced care paramedics and we put them in a vehicle like the one you see here. And that vehicle has everything that an ambulance would have, except it doesn't have a stretcher. So you can't transport, but you can treat just about anything. They have a dual role. They will go and visit Mrs. Smith and do her blood work and check her vitals and all that kind of stuff that you would expect in sort of a more non-acute home care kind of environment. But they have the radio going. So if there's a cardiac arrest or a big trauma or another critical call in which they can get there before an ambulance, they will go. So they will self-prioritize themselves, and so they will jump and do advanced life support backup and 911 backup to the existing deployment, mixed in with their more home care model, which is interesting because it keeps the acute skills of our medics sharp, but it also provides the maximum use of the resource that we have in the community, and we put the resource in place where it's needed most in that particular time. I've been on a community call where you're sitting down, you're discussing how life has been, you're talking about the grandkids and whatever else you're doing in a home visit, and the radio will go off and I'll say, oh, Mrs. Smith, I have to go down the road for a moment, I'll be back in an hour, and if I'm not back in an hour, I'll come back tomorrow to see you. And that's totally fine and allows us to have both the acute and the non-acute role at the same time. So it's an interesting model. Having patient-centered care is certainly not novel. It's not new to most aspects of healthcare, but for us, it is. Because on the acute side of the business, it's not as much about the patient as it is about the patient's condition. So if somebody's in cardiac arrest or suffered a major trauma or is having a stroke, it's about what can I do now to reverse this? Where do I need to go? Do I need to run into the stroke center? Do I need to call a helicopter? Do I need to do a bypass and go to CHEO? It's all about the condition right then and there. We don't spend a lot of time talking to the patient. Right? If you're having a STEMI, you need to go to the Heart Institute. There's not a whole lot of discussion about needs and wants and all that good stuff. So on the acute side of our business, while we talk about the patient, a lot of our immediate contact is what's best for this patient in terms of the next level of care, where's the most appropriate place, and how do we get them there? So this is the other side of the coin where it's all about the patient, which for us is a different set of gears that works in our head, because you have to turn the other stuff off. It's not about the condition anymore, or you or the most appropriate hospital. It's about what does the patient want, what does the patient need, what types of services do they have already, and how to integrate with that. So for us, it's a slightly different model of care. Integration of care is a big issue. We have many services available across the county. We have a wide number of people that we interact with. And so we get our patients, or we call them clients on the community side, we get our clients from many of these folks, and we actually refer back again, so it's not a one-way street. We get about 20 to 25% of our referrals from family physicians who are either in family healthcare team practices or in sole practice. We are basically the eyes and ears. Can you check on Mrs. Smith? I just changed her warfarin, and can you stop and see her twice a week and check her INR? We have bedside INR testing. And let me know how it goes until we get her INR settled to where it should be. So we tend to be the eyes and ears of the family practitioner responsible for that patient. So we get about 20-25% of our referrals are basically extensions of the family dog. Another 20-25% are the hospitals in our region, from the geriatric emergency nurses and from the discharge planners, same sorts of things. We find some interesting things from the GEM nurses. You know, they come in, they get told a story by the patient, and there's something in that story which doesn't sit right with the GEM nurse. But the GEM nurse can't exactly go outside, walk down the road and see if there's food in the fridge and see if the house is tidy and see if really the environment is suitable. But they learn fairly quickly that we can. The paramedics show up at the door, they have a nice smile. Oh yes, we hear you were at the hospital a couple of days ago. They asked if we could just stop in and see how you're doing. And they're quite glad to see us. And then we can go in and we can have a nice little chat, and then we can look at the environment. Is there food in the fridge? Are there falls hazards? Are there grab bars in the bathrooms? And we can have these nice little chats, and then we can start the ball moving and either affirm that yes, the house is fine, everything's great, or maybe there are some things that we need to go and address and introduce those services. So it's a very interesting relationship that we have with the hospital, in that we can actually, because we're a mobile service, we can go out and be mobile and just knock on people's doors, and usually they let us in. The other referrals that we have coming in is from our 911 side of the business. We'll have a crew goes on a 911 call, they'll bring in a patient who's had a fall into emerge, and next thing you know, they're on the phone to the community paramedics saying, I just did a 911 call on such and such an address with such and such a street, they need help. You know, we have two folks in their 90s, one has Alzheimer's, the other has mobility issues, and there's, you know, and I'm concerned about them. What can we do to help them? So we get actually referrals from our 911 side of our business over to the community side of our business, and then we make the loop back through the hospital or through the family physician, and we end up identifying those folks as a result of being in their home and being in the environment that they're in. So interesting, about 20-25% of our referrals last year actually were self-referrals, which was a very, very surprising result. These are just some of the rough numbers of the folks we have. 95% live alone. Many of them are over the age of 85. We have lots of folks in their mid-90s living at home in a farmhouse with no telephone. And interesting that. We have a lot of comorbidities. In the earlier chart that I showed you of the scorecard of causes of death in Renfrew County, we have a lot of folks who are dealing with multiple challenges, and we have a large portion of our population, almost 80%, are dealing with 4 or more issues on a daily basis. So these are complex patients. You know, the folks that get involved in this are advanced care medics. They're mostly very, very experienced, you know, people, 8 or 10 years worth of experience. They've seen a lot. They know a lot about the medications, and that's a big part of our business is the geriatric population. And it takes a lot to try to assess these folks and to try to figure out what's going on and to work within the team when you have this much stuff going on. This is just some of the things that we do in the county. I realize that some of these are hard to read. I'll just skip through some of them. I'll go into some in more detail, but we've got lots of things going on. Community paramedicine is very new. This is all pilot projects, so we're trying different things and seeing where we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. Some of these things may survive, some of them may not later on. I talked about ad hoc home visits, which we do. We do scheduled home visits as well, so we try to come every Tuesday or Wednesday for 4 or 5 weeks because we're monitoring a problem that's a little bit more dynamic. Changes to anticoagulants is one really obvious example, but management of hypertension is another, diabetes is another, where we have an issue that's maybe has become acute for one reason or another, and we really want to keep a handle on it. And so that's very variable. We do wellness clinics, which I'll speak about in a moment. Remote monitoring, which I have a slide on, which is really an exciting new innovation in our world. And but one of the other things that we're really getting involved in is integration within the HealthLinks teams that are active in our community, where we're working around the table with the family physicians, with the home care nursing staff, with the dietitians, and in helping provide a more robust circle of care for those patients in the community. HealthLinks, so we have an active program with the HealthLinks out of Arnprior at the moment, and it's really targeted those top 5% of users who occupy 85% of the healthcare budget. And it's really a collaborative, sit around the table kind of deal, where we work as part of that larger team in order to provide that consistency of service and access to the service, which is often one of the biggest problems in our population that are at 80 or 85 years old. Navigation is a big issue. You know, they may not even know what's out there, and if they do have a rough idea, they may not have the ability to access it. So it helps with that. I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote. We had a lady in the Arnprior area who had 5 or 6 chronic health conditions. In the 6 months prior to getting involved with the HealthLinks project, she had 5, maybe 6 hospital admissions in a 6-month period, 4 to 5 days, 6 days at times. And she was a frequent user of 911 service. She was often in her family doc's office, so there were a lot of issues there. Got involved with the HealthLinks team, where it was more team-oriented approach. The community paramedic visited her in her home to execute the plan that was derived by the team. And he happened to run into the family doc in the community one day and said, "What's going on with Mrs. Smith? She hasn't been in my office in months." And, well, I see her every week. Oh, great, and that's wonderful. And they actually went back and looked, and in the 9 months after she had started as a client in this program, she only had 1 hospital admission for 3 days. So good for her, good for the community, and good for the healthcare system from a dollars point of view, if that's your focus. So that's anecdotal, but we have many, many, many stories of that, where if you can keep them happy and healthy in their home, everybody wins. We do a lot of these wellness clinics. We show up at senior centers, euchre tournaments, wherever people gather. And so you can go and get your blood pressure checked and whatever it is you need done that we have the ability to do, and then you can go play euchre or bingo or show up for whatever reason you've showed up. And so we tend to work around where our client base is, and we run about 500 or 600 people through these every month. They have this little book that they bring in so they can look back and see where their blood pressure was over time and so on. Many, many contacts. That is a very, very popular program. In many of our areas, we don't have a great deal of services. Until very recently, we had no family doctor in Eganville, for example. Eganville is about 1,200 people, but the community around Eganville, very remote, but lots of folks, no family doc for many, many, many years. And basically, we ran clinics there because we were the only people they could access to talk to come in and ask questions, or get their blood pressure checked, get their blood glucose checked, that sort of thing. So this really fills in a little bit of a gap in that if we do manage to target somebody who really needs urgent care, then we can sort of grab them and see if we can facilitate that. But this has been a long-term thing. We've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. We now refer to many, many services, somewhere in excess of 20 different services, depending on what those individual folks need. Remote monitoring, that has a particular interest to me from my technology background. This is J.D. Heffron, who works with HealthLinks out of Arnprior and runs a program here with Philips. We have these home-based patients get up in the morning, they go to the washroom, and then they step on the weigh scale. It's a wireless device. Then they take their blood pressure. If appropriate, they take their blood glucose, they take their SpO2, and it all connects wirelessly back to our center, where each patient has a range. If they're outside the range, we get an alert, and then JD can call back and say, "Your weight is up by 2 kilos this morning, what's going on?" or your oxygen level's down today, what's going on? Or your heart rate is up or down. And we can have a phone call, we can have a video call, and you can have a discussion then and there to find out what's going on. This is really interesting in that it doesn't require a home visit. Our patients like it. They feel like somebody's watching them. In fact, we are. It's a little big brother-like. It's very comforting for the family as well. It's a little bit, and this is done twice a day, it's a little bit like I'm going to check in on mom in the morning, and then when I come home from work, I'm going to check in on her again. Some people can't do that. So we're mom, basically. We're going to check in on mom or dad and keep an eye on them. And then we have the whole record. And then JD can act on whatever's going on and talk to them over the phone, and then make a decision based on talking over the phone whether he is then going to go and say, you know what, I'm going to pop by and see you in a few minutes. You know, maybe they got a new cough or something and he really wants to listen to her lungs or have a more physical assessment. Or if he's really concerned, he may call an ambulance to go, because the ambulance will get there ahead of him. And we've had those instances as well, where you call on somebody so short of breath they can't talk to you. Yeah, that's an acute situation. We're not going to mess around. So it's a very interesting model, and we're quite excited where that's going. If money is of interest, which it always is when trying to get anything off the ground, and it's actually quite a cost saver. Treating people in, surprisingly, you know, treating people in their homes economically is much better than bringing them into an acute care facility where beds are scarce and they're expensive. And in this particular estimate done last year on 100 patients, you know, it saves $300,000, $335,000 per 100 patients. Not a vast amount of money, but the money, I think having a good financial argument, it's just another leg on the table because the patients like it, the healthcare providers like it, everybody likes it, and it's cheaper. So it's kind of hard to argue with that. We have another project up in Deep River, which is way up, 200 kilometers from here up the Ottawa River. We're together in a vehicle. They do house calls. They do house calls for folks who are waiting for long-term care beds, of which there's a scarcity. And so they go in and they see them on a regular basis and they attend to their needs. We've actually found that many of these folks have, when they've actually been offered a long-term care bed, said, no, I'm good now, and have actually not taken the bed as it's coming available, which is really nice because that really wasn't the target. It was, we were really literally putting our finger in the hole in the dike because these folks were using acute care facilities for chronic care problems, and we were just trying to deal with that. We didn't really think that we could turn the clock back, but on some of them, what we did. This is some of the data from that. It's interesting that when you actually get people and go into people's homes and are able to reassure them and to be able to deal with the problem at home, they tend to stay at home. So we had about 114 911 interactions, 86 of those we ended up staying at home. And a very small number of them got transported. We only had 2 at CTAS-2, 3 at CTAS-2 of the 28 there. That's so we did manage to come across some folks who really needed to go to the hospital, but very low numbers actually got transported. So again, this goes to support the home care model is certainly beneficial across a number of axes. And these are some of the numbers here. Maybe you've seen these before. Not too surprising that we have a tremendous cost benefit from the aging at home program as opposed to long-term care, assuming you can even get a long-term care bed. So where are we going from here? Right now, every community paramedicine project in Ontario is pilot funded, and so that is transitioning now. Champlain Lynn just announced $608, I think, or $618,000 permanent direct funding for the community paramedic models in the Lynn. So we're now moving from a piloted to a funded model, which is great. So now we can start making some more long-term plans. And the model, which I think is most enthusiastic and most enthusiastic, but most promising, is the working within the health links models. Where we're working with the other healthcare providers and not just the community paramedics running around trying to keep all the plates spinning, but we're sitting around the table. Remote monitoring and the use of technology is a part of that. It's not no one's going to suggest that that's the solution to everything, is having a TV set that talks to grandma. You know, it has to be part of the team and part of the tools. We do have other tools we use. I mentioned we have point of care INR. Seems like a simple thing, but boy, does that ever, people love that. You know, can you imagine somebody having to go and drive 80 kilometers in the winter once a week and they're 90 years old and they, you know, big deal if you can go and show up and for 30 seconds later you have the answer. So those sorts of investments in technology where it makes sense, huge benefits, and we're continuing to look at that. Resource infrastructure is a bit of an issue. We have on any given day between 3 and 5 community paramedics who run around. That's all they do is the community paramedics. Well, we have 50 paramedics on the road on any given day. How do we get those folks involved? Even more resources. So how do we expand beyond having like a dedicated team that every ambulance and every paramedic is a community paramedic and is an available resource to the healthcare community to deliver that? And that's an infrastructure challenge. That's an air traffic control kind of challenge because we have to balance the acute and the non-acute model. So those are some of the things we're worried about in the background and making this work. The other thing that we're looking at too is investing more in paramedic education and looking at what are the needs we have in the community. Our community paramedics now go through some extra training, like we do blood draws and those sorts of things. Some of them have gotten even wound care training, which normally wouldn't be within a paramedic scope because that's not what we do. But up in the county, there was a need in one area to do wound care, and there was really no service available that was doing it, and so they got involved in that. So what are these opportunities, and how can we bring those in and provide them to a service that's already in the community? It's already mobile 24 hours a day, and we're already paying for as taxpayers. You know, how can we squeeze more out of those folks? And so I think we're going to see some movement there as well.